In the hidden halls of the Vatican and the perfumed chambers of Ferrara, one of the most unsettling stories of the Renaissance was woven. Lucrezia Borgia was not just another noblewoman in 15th century Italy. She was a tool of power, a figure shaped by the boundless ambition of her father, Rodrigo Borgia, who would later become Pope Alexander VI, and by the ruthless intrigues of her brother, Cesare, a man who would not hesitate to kill to achieve his goals. From the moment of her birth, Lucrezia had no choice. She was educated, adorned, and manipulated as a strategic piece in the plans of one of the most feared and hated families of her time. History has remembered her as a poisoner, an incestuous woman, an ally of evil. But behind the myth lies a life marked by forced obedience, betrayal disguised as love, and the constant threat of becoming the next sacrifice in a game over which she never had control. Her beauty, intelligence, and refinement were merely tools others used to negotiate power. Legend has it that she was a lover of both her father and her brother. But the truth, beyond the rumors, reveals something even more disturbing: the fate of a young woman condemned from birth to fulfill the desires of a corrupt church and a family without scruples. This is not just a story about Lucrezia. It is a journey through the moral decay of an era where sins were currency and power justified everything. Join us in this deep exploration of her life, and decide for yourself whether she was a victim or an accomplice, whether her story was written by her or by the men who used her. What you are about to hear is not a fable, it is history, and it will forever change the way you see the name Borgia. Lucrezia Borgia was born on April 18, 1480, in the small town of Subiaco, far from the luxuries of Rome, but not for lack of lineage. She was the illegitimate daughter of Rodrigo Borgia, an ambitious cardinal who already had his path to the peak of ecclesiastical power clearly laid out. Lucrezia's mother, Venanza Catanii, was not a mere concubine. She was a clever and well-connected woman, Rodrigo's favorite for years. Yet even her affection and the children they had were not enough to make their relationship public. That is why Lucrezia was brought into the world in the shadows, raised discreetly and away from the scandal of being the daughter of a prince of the church. From her earliest years, her life was carefully planned. Rodrigo knew that his daughter could be a key instrument in his future political moves. It was not just about raising a lady but preparing a future queen of diplomatic chess. Lucrezia was educated by noblewomen, such as Adriana de Mila, her father's cousin, who also served as her mentor and confidant. She received an education far surpassing that of most women of her time. She mastered Latin, Greek, Italian, and Castilian. She knew how to embroider, paint porcelain, play musical instruments, and write eloquently. She was not only meant to appear virtuous, she had to be virtuous. Every gesture, word, and glance in public would reflect the power of her family. But behind that facade of refinement, a family environment of limitless ambition brewed. Her father was determined to reach the papal throne, and when he succeeded in 1492 as Alexander VI, he turned his children into pawns of his pontificate. By the age of 12, Lucrezia already understood that she was not free. Her destiny was an extension of her father's decisions and the ambitions of her brother Cesare, a man as charismatic as he was cruel, who would not hesitate to sacrifice everything for power, even his own blood. Lucrezia's childhood was not that of a child, it was the training of a political instrument. A meticulous preparation to be delivered, without remorse, to the highest bidder. And although her surroundings were filled with luxury, gardens, music, and gold-embroidered dresses, the real air she breathed was one of calculation, convenience, and absolute obedience. When Rodrigo Borgia was crowned as Alexander VI, the Vatican was transformed. It was no longer a center of faith, but a machine of power fueled by pacts, threats, and complicit silences. In that world of unbridled ambition, Lucrezia had no childhood, no youth, no right to say no. She had to become a perfect instrument, an impeccable reflection of her family's power. Not because she wanted to, but because she had no other choice. Her first marriage was the harshest test of this reality. At 13, still with a child's voice and innocent dreams, she was given to Giovanni Sforza, heir of a powerful Milanese family. There was no spiritual ceremony or sincere vows, it was a cold political pact, where the dowry was influence and the altar a diplomatic battlefield. Lucrezia knew she was not loved. But the saddest part was that they did not expect her to love either. Her value lay in her name, and in her womb. Giovanni was nothing more than a piece on the board, and when he no longer suited the Borgias, he was discarded with the cruelty of a smiling executioner. Rodrigo and Cesare accused him of impotence to justify the annulment. Giovanni's honor was publicly destroyed. And Lucrezia, no matter how much compassion she felt, remained silent. A silence that was not cowardice, but survival. That betrayal was her first crime without blood, but not the last. That episode was a lesson in power disguised as scandal. She understood that truth was malleable, morality an illusion, and that her body, her name, and her emotions would be used again and again by those who claimed to love her. The obedient child faded away. In her place, a woman with a shielded heart and eyes trained to read danger before it arrived began to form. After the public humiliation of her first marriage, Lucrezia could have broken. But instead, she became quieter, more calculating, more dangerous. She learned to move like a shadow among intrigues, to interpret her father's gestures, to anticipate Cesari's violent impulses. And then her second marriage arrived. This time, not with indifference, but with a hint of real emotion. Alfonso of Aragon, young, gallant, and as trapped as she was in the web of power, was chosen as her next husband. At first, he seemed different. Lucrezia did not just tolerate him, she loved him. For the first time, her life seemed to have a breath of relief, a crack of light amid so much darkness. But in the palaces of the Vatican, there was no room for cracks. There was no place for love. Caesar knew it, and every gesture between his sister and Alfonso sparked in him a silent, venomous rage. It was not mere sibling jealousy. It was possession, power, absolute control over the one person he perhaps could not fully manipulate. When Alfonso began to pose an obstacle to the Borgia political plans, especially due to his closeness to the crown of Naples and his resistance to French interests, the decision was swift. Caesar had to get rid of him. Rodrigo approved it. Lucrezia was the only one who tried to prevent it. One night, desperate, she revealed to her husband the plan that her own blood had devised to kill him. She managed to help him escape. For days, they lived with fear lurking around every corner. But the Vatican was a cage with no exits. They captured him, stabbed him on the steps of St. Peter's, and, while he still lay dying in his bed, they finished him off while she was away, naively believing the danger was over. When Lucrezia returned, she found a cold corpse where she had left the only man who might have saved her. She did not scream. She did not cry. She locked herself away for days in a convent, not to pray, but to rebuild herself once more. She had lost more than a husband. She had lost all faith in escape. Because in the Borgias, no one escapes. You either transform, or break. Time, although it does not heal, erodes even the most potent poisons. After the death of Alfonso of Aragon, Lucrezia returned to her role as a piece on the family chessboard. No longer by choice, but by inertia, by lack of escape. Her father was still Pope. Caesar continued to pull the strings from the shadows. And once again, Lucrezia had to obey. This time, the goal was more ambitious, the powerful house of Este, in Ferrara. Alfonso d'Este, heir to the duchy, was a cold, pragmatic man, deeply aware of the stigma carried by Borgia blood. He did not desire Lucrezia, but he knew what he would gain from her. And she, for the first time, had no strength left to resist. Yet something happened in Ferrara. Without the shadow of her father, without Caesar's constant supervision, without whispered orders in the Vatican halls, Lucrezia began to breathe differently. She had no freedom, but she had a truce. Little by little, she stopped being the woman molded by others and began to sculpt herself. She was no longer the obedient young woman, nor the lover of bacchanals, nor the vengeful widow. Now she was a duchess, a mother, a protector of artists and poets, a patron of humanism. In the halls of Ferrara, people spoke of her culture, her serenity, her ability to mediate disputes that had previously been solved with daggers. She was the same Lucrezia, but a more complete version. More human. More her own. The black legend did not disappear, but in Ferrara it began to blur. Enemies who had described her as incestuous, venomous, diabolical, now spoke of a sensible, moderate, devout woman. Even Alfonso himself eventually yielded to this transformation. Not out of passion, but out of respect. He came to call her the mother of the people. And perhaps she was. Because in the end, amid the mire of Renaissance politics, Lucrezia learned to flourish. Not as a saint, nor as a martyr, but as a survivor. Lucrezia Borgia died at the age of 39, in 1519, after giving birth to her 8th child. Life left her with the same intensity with which she had lived each of her days, marked by scandal, strategy, pain, and eternal suspicion. History has not been kind to her name. For many, she remains the embodiment of Renaissance perversity, the Pope's daughter, the brother's lover, the poisoner with a ring. But when we separate myth from archive, legend from document, we discover something more unsettling. Lucrezia was not the author of all her sins. She was an instrument. A victim. A survivor in a time when being a woman meant playing with fire, and she played in a blaze. How guilty was she really? How much of her image was constructed by her political enemies? And how much by society's eternal need to turn powerful women into monsters in order to understand them? What is certain is that Lucrezia was brilliant, refined, cultured, and capable. Her story is more complex than any legend. She was victim and executioner. Pawn and queen. Saint to some, and demon to others. Even centuries later, her figure continues to provoke. Because behind the Borgia name, among the smoke of poisons and the shadows of scandals, there was a woman of flesh and blood, trapped in the threads of a power she never asked to belong to, but that she learned to master, until the end. If this story impacted you, like it, share it with someone who loves unfiltered history, and subscribe to keep discovering the hidden faces of the past. Because as Alexander VI himself said, there are things that do not need permission to be done. And remember, a people who do not know their history are doomed to repeat it.